something we get to do. There's stuff we have to do. You know, when Jesus said, any man that wants to come after me, did he say he gets to take up his cross and follow me? He said, no, he must do it. When Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, did he say, Father, I get to die for you tomorrow. I get to do this. No, he said, do I have to do this? Is there another way? But if there's not, I'm going to do it because I have to do the will of my Father. You see, a gift, something we have to do. You know what he did get to do? He had to die, but he got to rise on the third day. You see, we have to die to get the gift. The gift oftentimes comes later, doesn't it? I remember I hated putting down my old hunting dog. That was a choice I had to make. I didn't get to do that. She was 15 years old. I loved that dog, but she had gotten blind, and she was peeing all over the place. She became a burden to the family, and we were moving to a new property, and I knew it was going to be too hard to keep her, so I put her down, and I cried for 2 days straight. But little did I know, in that next year, Melissa's dad's health would go down, and we would be in and out of nursing homes, doctor's appointments, and dealing with some mental things and stuff that he was going through, amputations, just one thing right after another, and it was a very hard year. And in the middle of that year, my wife found a little puppy she'd always wanted, and we brought it home, and I didn't realize but what a gift that would be when she was going through that time to come home at night and play with that little dog to bring her some joy. But the old dog had to be put down before the gift of the new dog came in, and it's that way in your life as well. But we have to make that choice. Many of you may have heard of W.C. Burns, who was a young minister in Scotland who experienced great revivals as a young man in his 20s. Early on, and crowds began to gather. He could have went to New York. He could have went to Chicago, all these places, and preached from some of the greatest pulpits in the world. But he went and he buried himself in China. And he began sowing seeds throughout China all his life, never really reaping the fruit. But you know who did reap the fruit? The missionaries who became behind him. You see, the gift is often experienced later. That's why I'd have a hard time recognizing it so often. Do you recognize the gift of choice, the fact that you actually have a choice? Verses 11 through 12 in the story, the woman says, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? She said, Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and flocks? She said, Where can you get this water? And it was right in front of her. You see, she didn't recognize the source. In order for you to make that choice to die every day, you got to recognize the real source of the water. See, she recognized the source of the well water. Why? Because she was dependent on it. She was used to having to go to it. You recognize what you're dependent upon. That's why someone who's addicted to drugs or needing their fix on that, they'll say, this is my source. They know where their source is. If you're dependent upon it. What's your fix this morning? Because if we're going to deny ourselves this world and the things of this world, we are dependent on one thing, and that thing is grace. The unmerited favor of God that comes into our life to strengthen us. What's your fix? Because Hebrews 12:2 says this, fix your eyes on Jesus. He's the author and the finisher of our faith. He's the author of it. He wrote it in blood. He's the source. But there's a problem. We can't fix our eyes often on Jesus like we want to. Why? Because he's unattractive. Jesus is unattractive oftentimes. Imagine what he looked like to this woman that day. He was hot, tired, dusty. He didn't look like the source of living water to her. He was like any other man. He said, woman, give me a drink, didn't he? He didn't look attractive to her, and he doesn't look attractive to the modern day world either. Not the real Jesus. But what do? We try to dress him up. We try to make him look good, don't we? Anytime that we're witnessing or doing something like that, oh, you can have your best life now. You can have power and peace, and we build him up like that. Our small group listened to an illustration by Kyle Ottoman the other day, author of Not a Fan, and he said, imagine if my daughter got to a certain age and she wasn't married, so I stepped in to intervene. And I put her on a billboard. And I talked her up and wrote out, and I put her pictures everywhere, and I invited people to come and meet with her. He said, would that raise her up or would that cheapen her and embarrass her? You see, Jesus didn't glamorize the cross like we do, did he? He didn't do that. When somebody came to him and said, I'll follow you wherever I go, did he say, oh, you're going to see miracles, we're going to do this, it's going to be exciting? No, he said, I don't even have a place to lay my head. He said, go say. Jesus would have been looked at as one of the worst evangelists in our day and time, wouldn't he? The woman said, are you greater than Jacob? Where's your dipper? Where's your way to dip it? She was looking for means and greatness. Are you greater than Jacob? Because that's the way we tend to think the source is, through means and greatness, don't we? It's what seems right to us. Proverbs 14:12 says this, there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is in the way of death. There's a way that seems right and that we're drawn to. That's why we've got to stay in the Word, the source. Jesus is the Word. He's the culmination of the Word. I've hidden my Word in my heart. Why? So I may not sin against you. In other words, so I may choose right. The source. Jesus goes on in verse 13 through 14, and he answered this lady and said, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become up in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. Jesus is always compared to water. Whether it's in Isaiah when it says, I will pour out water on the thirsty land, or in John when he says, if any man wants to come to me, let him drink. Or in Revelation, the streams of life, the water of life. He's always compared to water. You know, in duck hunting, when it gets to be January and all the ponds freeze and there's no place for the ducks to land, we always look for a pond that's spring-fed. Because whatever's spring-fed, it's always moving. And when the hard times come and the cold times come, it keeps that water moving and keeps it open. And you know what happens? The ducks come there. Let me tell you something. If you've got that spring of life welling up in you that keeps on giving, that doesn't get dry as you keep going to the source of His Word and those decisions, let me tell you something. It'll draw people. Even though it's not an attractive lifestyle, it'll draw people. One of my favorite posts this year was Carolyn Morris when she posted her father sitting in that wheelchair. I asked her, could I share that? As he sat in that wheelchair in front of the refrigerator, and there was all the family members, and she put it on there, and it had a lot of views as he prayed over each one of his children, and it was just pouring out this mightyful prayer. And there he was going through dementia, going through a fog, going through COVID, dealing with his lungs and all that stuff. But it was like a well coming out. Why? Because he knew the source, and it drew views, didn't it? You know the source. In verse 15, the woman says, give me some of this water. I want this water, so I won't get thirsty anymore. And so I don't have to keep coming here. That stood out to me. So I don't have to keep coming here to draw water. She recognized the burden of going to the wrong well. You know, when we turn on our water, we don't think nothing about it, right? But you go to Africa, a little 5-year-old child that has to walk 3 to 5 miles a day to carry a little bucket of water, they recognize the burden of the water. Why don't we recognize the burden of the sin in our lives, or the stuff we keep drawing from? The everyday things that we choose to do that are a part of the world oftentimes, or when we choose it over Christ and we think it's going to bring us satisfaction. The stuff that revolves around us, the burden of our sin in our lives. You know, all those scriptures referred to Jesus, of the stream and water, the streams of life. And we see Jesus compared to water all along the way. But when he was on the cross, it says he was our sin for us, wasn't it? He became sin. And I find it ironic that the last two words, well, some of the last two words when he was on the cross was what? I'm thirsty. Because he was going through the burden of your sin. Understanding that the world that dries up. Recognize, why don't we, you know, oftentimes we recognize the burden of the big sins, don't we? Adultery and stealing and bitterness and murder and things. We recognize the burden of those sins. But what about the stuff nobody sees? What about the stuff that's hidden? You know, in that 1 John verse, and when it's describing the things of the world, it says, the one that stood out to me the most is what a man has and what a man does. Because if there's any idol in our day and time here in America, it's materialism. It's our stuff. All the stuff that we keep trying to draw from. Our basements, our garages, everything's full of stuff. And you ladies are looking at your husband, but your closets are full of stuff. We have yard sales and we move stuff just so we can get more stuff. Do we ever think about, a lot of times with vacations and new cars and things like that, we think about the burden of the price tag. Yes, it's going to hurt our bank account. Yes, we're going to have to work some more. But do we think about our children and our spouses and maybe those that don't know the Lord carrying that burden? Because we're strained. The burden of stuff, why don't we recognize it? I like to play golf. I had a buddy the other day who let me use his driver out on the golf course. He said, here, use this one. I'd never used one of those great big-headed, nice drivers, and I hit it, and I hit it good. I said, man, what's that cost? He said, about $350. I said, oh, I probably won't have one of them. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll sell you that one for $100. I said, oh, man, $100. I got to have that. I need that. If I can improve my golf game, life is going to go up here. And so I went home and I asked my wife, Melissa, Mikey's got a golf club I want to buy. It's $100. Can I get it? She said, well, you always preach where a man's wallet is, there's where his heart is. So I waited a couple days, and I bought it. And I kept it in the trunk for the next month. And Ben golfed with me one day, and he came inside and said, Mom, you seen Dad's new driver? But I remember taking that club one of my first outings. And the school had gotten us through some company that we buy from and set us up where we could play where UK plays. And it's a real nice course. And I went out on that driving range with my new driver, And I got up there and I got along beside all these other men with their nice drivers, all dressed real nice and everything. And I got up there and it amazes me, I was proud of it and got up there, how you can take a ball and swing and hit this way, and I almost took out every guy down this way. But I had to have it. It was going to change me. Let me ask you something, church. What's in your trunk? What is it that you're hiding that you don't recognize the burden of? What is that neutral wire between you and the world? What you hide? Let me ask you something. If we had to say everybody's searches were allowed to be checked, put on the big screen from their phones, would we recognize anything? Would you be okay with that? What are you hiding in your trunks? Do we recognize the burden? Verse 16, after this lady said, give me some of this water. Jesus said, I love what he said right here. He said, go get your husband. Go get your husband. I want some of this water, okay? Go get your husband and come back. She said, I have no husband, you replied. Jesus said, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. So what you've said is quite true. Why did Jesus point this part out? Out of all the stuff that lady had dealt with, why did he bring this to light? Because I think Jesus was saying, if you want to drink this water, then you need to recognize commitment. She needed to recognize commitment. If you're going to die daily, you've got to recognize commitment. She struggled with contentment, didn't she? And if you're a person who struggles with contentment, trust me, you're going to struggle with commitment. If the grass is always greener on the other side, then you are burdened more for contentment than you are commitment. To die daily takes commitment. There were 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. All of them were affected. Some lost lives, caught and tortured. Some lost children. Homes burned, businesses ravaged. Many of those men were wealthy to do. They were people of to-do, and when they died bankrupt. Many of them. Because, you see, they were more burdened and committed to a free country and a cause rather than the burden of their stuff. David Livingstone was a missionary who pioneered Africa. One time, London's missionary committee got word to him, and they said, we've got a lot of people that want to come help. Tell us an easy road to get to you. Tell us the easiest way for them to get to you. Livingstone wrote them back and said, if they're concerned about an easy road, tell them to stay in England. I don't want them. He said, because I'm looking for people who are willing to come if there's no road at all. People who are willing if the options are off the table. No other options but forward. Studies show that most people want a choice that has a return policy. They want to keep their options open. They want to live with their options open. That's why so many people live together before they get married. Want a return policy, want a way out. But the problem is, if you're always living with your options open, you're always staring at a downside. You're always looking at the downside of one or the other. Studies actually show that people are more happy and have more joy when they commit to a choice that they can't back out of, when the options are off the table. One thing April Wilhoit's mother and father used to always say, I respect it. They said, we live our marriage like divorce season. It's not even an option. Like it's like pigs fly. like it's taken off the table. We know it's an option, but like it's far from us, like it's not even there. Young people, that choice that you have to stay pure until you're married, one of the hardest choices you ever have to, yeah, it's always an option. You got to live with it like it's far off the table. Young men, you can get to the point where you don't have to stare and gawk at a woman that's dressed provocatively down the road. I know it seems the furthest thing from your mind to be able to do that, but you can get through it, but it's not some supernatural power that comes into you. It takes discipline and it takes commitment, and you can get over that. See, it takes commitment to get those options off the table. In football, they like to run the option play, right? The option play, the quarterback has different options to do with the ball based upon how the defense is lining up, based upon how the enemy is strategizing. But let me tell you something, church. As a church, we can't run the option play. We can't base it on how the enemy's lining up for us, because that's basing it on who he is and not who God is. We have one option, a team of one that we run. Because when you end up with a lot of options, it's like a roller coaster. It's almost like emotions. Emotions are like a roller coaster. Commitments have got to be over emotions. As that story ends, the woman says, "Sir, I can see you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that place we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman," he said, "a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for the salvations from the Jews." And he said, "Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." So many people today love worship and are consumed with worship, and that's exciting. And they have a good time, but it's another thing. Worship in spirit and truth takes commitment to go over emotions, because church today wants to appeal to your emotions oftentimes. Many people's experience in churches, that's the only religious experience they have, is a good worship service. And this morning we had a great one, didn't we? And I love them as much as anybody else. And I think that God inhabits the praises of his people. And it's a good thing. But let me tell you something. Sometimes you can get to a tornado of excitement and there never be real intellectual change of heart. That comes to the everyday decisions once you leave the parking lot out there. That's where salvation is lived out. That's where churches always we want to have the smoke and the lights and the whole 9 yards. And you know what? I've watched a lot of worship services going on in these places where they've been looting and rioting and all that. And you'll see on YouTube, that revival, it'll say, is broke out. Let me tell you something. I love seeing those people jump up and down and sing Jesus' name. And I would never question that. But I believe when true revival comes, you won't see people jumping up and down and singing Jesus' name. They'll be broken and on their face and crying. That's when true revivals hit. Do you recognize commitment? James, if you want to come, I'll close. I'll prepare to close. I had something happen this week. Well, it was about 2 weeks ago. Ben came home, and he said, and this is speaking to commitment over emotions. Ben came home and he said, "Dad, I had an assignment in biology that I didn't like." I said, "What do you got to do?" He said, "Well, they told me to pick any animal I wanted, to research it, and I'm supposed to get up and present to class proof of how that animal evolved from this animal. And I got to show the research and do it." And he said, "Dad, I felt bad about that." He said, and so I didn't go pick something like an ape that they said turned into a human like most people did, where you can just find all kinds of evidence. He said, I didn't do that. He said, I picked crabs because it said they didn't just ultimately change something else. They just kind of natural selection and that kind of stuff spread out. It made me mad. I wanted to get a little redneck about that one. Because I said, I'm going to go talk to that principal. I know you're going to teach it. I know you're going to teach it because you taught me as a theory, and I understand that you're going to teach it. But it's another thing when my son teaches it and presents it. Now I said, well, I'm going to go talk to the teacher. He said, hey, I can't have this. And then I told Ben, I said, you know what? Take a 0, get an F. I'll frame it. I'll put it on the wall. Get an F in that one. But I felt God saying, no, that's not the way. That's not the way. And so I went to prayer on it. Prayed, God, show me how they needs to handle that. And he said, just back away. It's his choice. And so I went to him and I said, son, I'm just going to tell you, I think you should do that. I think you should examine the evidence. Show them the evidence that's out there. But then I want you to go search the evidence that points to creation and compare them. And I said, if she says that report is 3 to 5 minutes, you spend the first 3 minutes proving their evidence, and you take the last 2 minutes to show them you don't believe it. And I said, I'll just be honest. That's the way I would have to clear my conscience of it and tell them I don't believe this, whether they like it or not. That's how I would have to clear my conscience of it. And then I backed away. And about a week went by, and I went to pick him up from ball practice one night. And I brought it up. I said, how's the biology stuff going? He said, oh, it's taken care of. And I said, what do you mean? It's taken care of. He said, well, the other day in class, as they were talking about it, and other kids were discussing it and their animals and this and that, he said, I raised my hand. And I said, Miss So-and-so, I need to ask you something. She goes, yes, Ben, what is it? He said, in regards to the assignment. She said, yeah, what can I help you with? He said, can I do it another way? He said, you wanted us to do it to point toward evolution and try to prove evolution. He said, can I do it another way? He said, can I present it and point toward creation? And she said, I invite you. I welcome you to do that. You see, he did it another way. Let me tell you something, folks. We could gather all of Georgetown. We could bring them in here and have the best worship service with a rock star preacher and a rock star band and have the greatest worship service ever. But I tell you, I don't think heaven and hell would be moved any more than when my young man slid his hand up and said, let me do it another way. You see, the choice that you have to make to follow Jesus Christ in this world is that, to do it another way. To die to yourself and do it another way. Recognize today. If you would, please stand. You know, that woman told Jesus, she said, I know that the Messiah is coming. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus declared, I who speak to you am he. And that's what he was saying. Recognize today. His dad quoted what Joshua said to the children of Israel. Choose this day. Choose this day whom you will serve. Quit going back and forth. It's all or nothing. Whom you will serve. As for me and my house. In other words, go get your husband. Go get your wife. Go get your kids. Because it's in the house of the everyday that those decisions are made. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And you know what the people said? Far be it from us to ever forsake God. And they went through a time of growth in the Lord. But they said, far be it from us. Let me ask you something. When it comes to you in the world, is the option far from you? Or is it right out there in your trunk? Or in your phone? James is going to sing a song where the chorus says, and you feel free to sing along with him, where the chorus says, in this running with the devil world, I'm going to choose to walk with you. And that's what we're talking about. And his dad said,